Yeah, thanks, Nihal. Hi, everyone. From Winchester, once capital of England, to thinking about creative cities in this modern industrial strategy. So, before we start, I just wanted to vaguely set the scene. So for those of you who've been frequent flyers with Beyond, the very first Beyond was about the last but one industrial strategy, which is where we started with creative clusters and Audience of the Future and all these new kind of interventions in the creative industries. And now we've got a new, or at least a green paper. So it's a kind of what we would think an industrial strategy might be like when we've filled in the docs. And I bet loads of people in this audience have made their submissions to the consultation on the industrial strategy. And I'm sure they're really fantastic and putting some of the flesh on the bones. But from my point of view is, they call this industrial strategy modern. I mean, I guess one wouldn't want an unmodern industrial strategy. But it bears some of the hallmarks of common to, say, the 2017 one, in that it identifies key growth sectors of the UK economy and says each of these will receive coordinated kind of support for those sectors. And the great thing is, for the second time, and without too much prompting, the creative industries are one of the 8 sectors that everybody's nodding, good, they've done their homework. 8 sectors. It's interesting that digital technologies is one of the other sectors, and it's something we might reflect on as to whether that makes a sensible thing. But it's so it identifies one of the sectors, but it doesn't say that much at this stage. And I'm hoping that we'll get some insight from my amazing colleagues here. It mentions the creative industries. I went through, sadly counted, there 17 times, but it doesn't really define a sector. It mentions cities and city regions pretty interchangeably 29 times. Which is really marvellous. And it mentions clusters 40 times. So they're not necessarily creative clusters, but clusters as a concept, as a model. And I think one of the hallmarks it has that is different from the previous industrial strategy, which I hope Kate will talk to, is that skills are much more prominent and seem much more threaded through. So I've got these 3 experts from the areas of education, but located in a city. So Kate with Birmingham Ormiston Academies Group, three specialist creative schools within Birmingham. We've got Tom, tech entrepreneur, but also guide for people like Channel 4 and other investors into the space. And of course, almost everybody in the audience will probably have experienced one of or other of Jude's creative outputs, either in the centres that she's run or the many plays she's directed or the strategies that she'd have all wow. So Tom, let's start with you. My guess is you're probably of all of us closest to the evolution of some of these ideas. So what do you take away from it? What have we got here, and what's it mean for creative industries on the one hand and cities on the other?
So I think, obviously we now have a green paper, which is good. But as a founder and as a tech founder, in my history and my time, you start with a vision, then the strategy, and then you work out the tactics. Whereas we've almost gone back to front in this scenario, where we've ended up with a budget, and we're going to have the spending review, then we're going to get the strategy. So that's the difficult bit at the moment. And I think what you would have seen with the budget, where we had 40 billion increase in taxes, 100 billion increase, more than 100 billion increase in commitments on spending, capital spending, but 0 growth impact. So the focus at this moment in time, I think, is going to be very strongly on these 8 sectors that they've laid out as priority areas, and how can they deliver to a growth story that ultimately is going to basically take away the restrictions from the financial perspective on how we're thinking about public services. The doom and gloom scenario of money being withdrawn left, right and centre from the arts, from the culture and so forth. And as a consequence, if we want to do that and deliver that story, the missing piece at the moment is that strategy on what is going to deliver growth and how, and delivering the economic argument for it. And I think certainly from the creative industries perspective, the building of the economic argument has been quite weak, I think. certainly in consequence to the economic argument that has built out over the last few years on science and technology. So science and technology has rapidly taken a huge amount of focus and priority from government. And there's a very clear and fast message whenever there's new policy initiatives on this is going to lead to this many jobs in this area for this number of people, and these are the skills that are going to be needed to deliver it. And I think that's the moment where there's an opportunity right now to basically raise the game on the creative industry side, to deliver that economic argument, to feed into an industrial strategy that will make sure that the creative industries gets its due proportion. So I think currently, for the arts, you've got 3% allocation from in comparison to 6% contribution to the economy. So it's punching below its weight, and I think now's a moment, especially where you see a Trump government coming in, where there's a potential to basically really sort of sit back and think, what are our UK cultural values, and how are we going to more accurately and more clearly differentiate ourselves from a cultural standpoint against a Trump USA.
So I think that sets out a real challenge actually for the creative sector, because you're saying we've got to get our story straight on growth, despite a history of growing faster than the rest of the economy. And to a degree, in the last industrial strategy, what we did was we learnt to talk the language of science, and went after the science, a little tiny bit of the science budget. So that's really interesting.
There's more to play for, I think.
Yes. So that's both optimistic and interesting then. Jude, what do you take out of this, and particularly for I didn't mention you're chair of One Creative North, which you may explain.
Yeah.
And what do you take out of it, and what do you think is in there for?
Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to say about government, because Nihal raised this, is that governments are fickle and long-lasting, although they try to be, and that if we keep swerving and ducking and diving to try to fit in with what government agendas are, we usually come a cropper somehow. And the reality is that the creative industries and the whole cultural sector has ploughed on just being amazing despite. And one of the sad things about politics is those of you who remember the first time the creative industries was really kind of put together as a frame, which was Chris Smith, when he was the first...
25 years ago.
Yeah, 25 years ago. He was the first ever Minister for Culture, Heritage and Sport. There hadn't been a minister at government level before that. And he created the cultural consortia, which were there to raise the economic profile of the creative industries and also create the data. The next government that came in chopped all that away, and we've never found a way, sort of at structural level, of having completely seamless data, of making a seamless argument, of building the language that we're all confident about, and so that's a pity. So I'm just saying that, in a sense, we have now a new, sausage dangling before us on a stick, and we're all very concerned to make sure that we get at it, and we have to. But we also, I think, need to remain very much in solidarity with each other about the values of why we do our work. And I say this because, you can say there's an industrial strategy. Is that the same as a strategy for creativity and wellness and positive communities? Not necessarily. And those of you who know what William Morris said in the Industrial Revolution will know that a lot of people didn't feel that in the Industrial Revolution served the majority of people. The industrial strategy that the government are putting forward is very much about growth, as Tom says, and growth means jobs and money going into the economy. It doesn't necessarily mean wellness and inclusivity, intersectional concerns. It doesn't necessarily mean any of those things. But it could do if the creative sector says it must do. And that's what I mean about having solidarity, really. Just another bit of the history, really, is that the creative industries, do they encompass all the arts? Do we mean, contemporary dance students as well as, VC artists? Well, we hope we do. But very often, because of money, things get siphoned off into what can we invest in that will grow exponentially and, clearly make money. And what do we have to keep on subsidising, God forbid, which is what government often worries about. Even though we can talk about our own ecosystem, we know that the issue is that people start wanting to invest, governments want to invest in the fast-growing monetary side of things. And that's what I think the industrial strategy wants us to do. So going back to One Creative North, I was asked about 9 weeks ago, to chair an idea, really, a strategy for how the Great North, for those of you who aren't from this country, the country is very divided psychologically into the south, which is basically London and all the rest of it, and then the north, which is the north. Speaking as a northerner, we don't punch to our weight yet. And so the idea of the Creative North, One Creative North, is to say, supposing we wrapped our arms around the whole of the north of England in its creative potential, in its potential for young people to have a skill and to move upwards and not to have a brain drain down to London. Supposing we did that, what could the potential of the north be? And so we're looking at what is the growth potential, what's the investment potential, and how can we get pan-regional creation. And that's really what I've been charged to do, to think about, and then write a report sometime in the spring, and at the same time think about where could we find the money to do key strategic investment in a way that grows the economy, grows skills, but I believe as well attends to this wider agenda of what we talk about when we discuss place-based change, which is that if it isn't a value to everybody, then you might actually end up with a more destructive component than you want.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to bring in Kate. Obviously, there's lots to take out of that. Obviously, Kate's based in Birmingham. I'm a West Midlander as well, so we know we're not in One Creative North.
No.
And we're not.
I'm not
and actually,
interested.
we're not in the South either. No. It turns out, and we're in the bloody Midlands.
We're in the Midlands. We're in the middle of the two, and we're just where HS2 stops.
Yes.
Yeah. So you pass through on the way to London from Manchester. We're in the Midlands.
Or as of yesterday, often stay for quite a while as well on the way to
Absolutely.
Manchester.
Come to Birmingham. We are, of course, the second city. Oh, did I say that in
You
Manchester?
did. You knew you were going to say that. So, Kate, so there is a thing in this industrial strategy. It talks a lot more about skills than certainly the previous Conservative governments did. I think there's obviously kind of ideological commitment there. But how do you see that? So you're developing a type. Basically, the way I take it is Birmingham's strategy for all this stuff is talent pipeline above all. That's strategically what's happening. But does this? What do you want to see out of this change?
I think it's very interesting. You just raised a point without realising, I think, Jude, the fact it's interesting it's called the industrial strategy. Because industry to me means kind of engineering, manufacturing, that kind of thing, not the growth strategy. You're talking really about a growth strategy. So it's ultimately using a phrase from the 1970s and 1980s, which is the industrial strategy. Because I think for a lot of people who would look at that straight away and switch off from it. What's it got to do with me in the creative industries? It's an industry strategy. And I think it actually probably needs to change its tune. I think the thing about skills, and skills was very much part of the last industrial strategy, particularly in the Midlands, the West Midlands, we talked a lot about skills. And we have one of the highest, very sadly, we've got one of the highest growing NEET rate, 19 to 25. It's huge at the moment in the Midlands and around the kind of skills area. So what I want to see is how do we build that skills pipeline and that talent coming through, and how do we then make use of it? We talk a lot about unemployment, graduates, that's one of the issues that are around at the moment, but also around in the creative industry. So there's kind of a bit of a mixed message from the creative industry. So I run 3 academies. One is performance, dance, musical theatre, all that kind of stuff. One's backstage, in stage and screen, and the other one's in digital. And, there's a very mixed message from the creative industries. You talk to some people, well, there's no jobs, there's massive unemployment. And then you talk to others, we can't find enough people to do stage set design, wig making, costumes. So we got a very mixed message coming out to young people about what the future is. And I think what I'd like to see for an industrial strategy is supporting some of those skills, because actually I think there's huge talent. And I think also some of the talent that comes out of creative industries people think they're just dancers on music. They're not. They're massively resilient. They're creative. They can do all sorts of stuff in terms of how they do and run and operate. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that. And I know that Andy Burnham talked this morning about apprenticeships and how that runs and operates. And I think that we need to see a little bit more come out about skills and how we can enhance them into creative industries. But more importantly, and I know that the government have talked about this a lot, about how we can bring creativity back into the curriculum. And in the widest sense, I don't just mean about that I put more dancers on stage. I mean about how do we bring creativity thinking back into the curriculum without it being a subject which kids then have to sit and examine, because that's quite tricky to do an exam in creative thinking. They did do it once, it didn't work very well. But that kind of the skills and talents that we have, and I hope that what the industrial strategy will do is think about that pipeline coming forward and how do we use the talents of our young people and develop them to come into the creative industries, because I think there's a huge industry there, and certainly in the Midlands our issue is around connectivity at the moment. So you will be aware that I work for one of the local council we have is £730 million in debt. I think it's probably 740 as I speak, maybe 750 by the time we finish. And therefore they have cut all their culture funding. There is no funding supplement from Birmingham Local Authority as of 2025. And that's a massive issue. How do we ensure that the creative sector is able to continue in Birmingham, and how do we do that? And that's about that London, Manchester and Birmingham have got to come together and work with one another and support one another, because actually that's the only way that culture will survive, particularly in Birmingham.
So that takes us on to in a way, what's the delivery vehicles? What's the unit of action of this? So you've got Jude, One Creative North. You've got Birmingham acting as a kind of city. And we've got the strategy that talks about clusters, and clusters means different things to different people. So how do you see it actually? What would you advocate for being the mechanisms that roll this out? Given that, Tom's saying we need to change our story, Jude saying, questioning, we've got to think about what do we mean by growth, and you're talking about a transformed sector, I think, in some ways. So how does this roll out?
I think that's a really big and difficult question. I think that's the bit that we've got to try and understand over the next few months before the industrial strategy is rolled out fundamentally. I mean, I think if you imagine the last few years, all sort of government thinking has been around this idea of levelling up, right? So, which I think on the one side, there's the positivity of like we want places in the country to rise, but on the other, it has become a bit divisive. I've felt in terms of
lots of competition, lots of things being picked from Westminster,
levelling that down, like nothing. We don't want to do anything London. And it's sort of worked against our core skills and where our clusters and our levels of expertise are, and it's worked against best practice. I've seen people just doing different things rather than thinking about how can we come together and actually use what we know to bring ourselves up and work on the basis of scale does matter in some things. You need to have people brought together. And you need to have that cross-fertilisation of knowledge, expertise, and the talent pools to be connected so that you can get to jobs. So when I think I was at the launch of the Northern Creative Corridor here a few weeks ago, that's talking about a corridor which, in theory, exists from Liverpool to Newcastle. Like that's a vast area. If that's going to be real, what are we doing about the transport between these places? Like, when it's so difficult.
Well, I'm sure
to
a
get
lot of
from
people in
Leeds
the
to
room have
Manchester.
opinions about that.
Yeah. So I mean, there are fundamentals which, in the backbone that we need to resolve.
Yeah, I mean, the workforce potential of this region is unable to be realised because they can't actually commute. So commuting from, Hazelmere into London or Peterborough into London is okay, and that's one massive workforce. You can't get from Liverpool to Skegness, and you can't get from Manchester to Bolton easily. I mean, this is one of the major problems. I don't think I'm going to solve that. Are you going to solve that? No. So
I'd like it to be solved, though.
But I'd like it to be solved.
Yeah.
But I think that I do place some faith, having said politicians are not necessarily to be relied on. I do have more faith in the Metro Mayor model, I really
I
do.
do.
And I mean, people this morning who saw Andy Burnham know that he does know what he's talking about, and he does believe in it. And Nihal's in love with him. And there is a reason for that. But,
it seemed mutual, actually.
Sorry?
It was mutual, I think.
Bros. Bro romance. But there are 7 metro mayors in the north, and then there are 3 more combined authorities, so there's going to be probably some more metro mayors. I think the combination of metro mayors who really can almost be apolitical to a degree anyway, but they have to care for their whole public. And also they have to balance out in a way they're in charge of all the policies. It's not like they're the transport minister fighting the sustainability czar. They are all of those things collectively. So the metro mayors, I think, have across the country have a real job they could do when they write their local growth plans to also commit themselves to issues to do with mental health and good education and skills and economic growth, and to use the kind of obvious knowledge of place-based change and the creative industries as something that they want to have in their growth plans. So I think that's a good thing. And then of course you mustn't forget that the infrastructure of fantastic local government offices and combined offices, they're not all committed to the industry, but we have to, I think, be much more collaborative with what they're doing, because I think that we've always looked at local and regional government as sort of the add-on funding, when in actual fact this is going to be about all of us rising again together. So I think that, as ever, talking to people, getting to know people and crossing sectors as well. I mean, just to finish, that if you're looking at a dance sector, you can't necessarily grow the dance sector or the literature sector, or the kind of the places that really require sustained money and are probably never just going to give it back eventually, except when they end up being Harry Potter. So those sectors need to be looked after nationally, not just regionally, because they're too small for that. Whereas, you can do something like Media City, and it can be its own growth productivity base. So it's a mixture of looking at all of those models together.
So that's a really interesting idea that different sectors actually might need different approaches.
I think they do.
And I was just going to ask you, Kate, so you've obviously had a change in Metro Mayor.
We have indeed, yes.
Do you have faith in the same faith that Jude has in the...
I actually do, yeah, and we have just had a massive change in Metro Mayor. So ours was Andy Street, who's was previously the CEO of John Lewis, and he's just become the chair of the rep in Birmingham, so that shows his massive commitment to creative. But we've turned over to Richard Parker, who's Labour, but both Richard and Andy, I know, have worked very closely with Andy Burnham up here in Manchester. And they have that much more kind of focus. And I know that we, myself at BOA, and I'm working with another training provider, Mission Accomplished, actually have skills contracts with WMCA to deliver into the sector. And they are very clear about wanting to get creative industries in, and we've got BBC coming, Stephen Knightley, and lots of other industries coming into Digbeth particularly. But both Richard and Andy, his predecessor, have very clearly wanted that creative sector, that development, that skills development. And I think your point is very true, that I think a lot more is coming their way. They're getting it, and there's been a recent announcement not long ago that there was more going to be decentralised to them, and they can work across sector. And I think that's what's different about them, that they are actually doing that, and they're thinking very much about all the sectors. But I do think, the regional mayors certainly, I know Birmingham worked with Manchester, and I won't go into the HS2 thing, but I know that Andy Squared at the time worked very closely when the government mentioned that they weren't going to move it further.
I know Tracy Braben, who was from the industry, she was an actor, she's really driving a lot of this narrative as well. And then Steve Rotherham, who's become a DJ. I mean, they do get it. And I think that is the most exciting thing, actually. And they're on the ground, which is where we need to be.
Absolutely.
So this is turning into quite a positive story, which is...
Well, we have to be, don't we?
Oh, no, that's true. But Tom's saying there's more to aim at. There's more to aim at. And actually, there's the rollout of the combined authorities, the Metro Mayors, gives us potentially a vehicle which is city-based at the moment. Obviously, there are big parts of the country that don't have combined authorities, which is kind of slightly problematic. But it sounds good. Do you think these, so say the city region mayors, I think of them, do you think those organisations have the skills? Because again, this is relatively new. If you're talking about research innovation or devolved R&D funding, around not culture but technology.
But I think that talks to the point that Jude made about, you're segmenting, right? So there's some stuff which is done at regional level. There's some stuff where you need the skill and the scale level to do at a high level. So, and I think those clusters will sort of ladder up and layer up in terms of size. But I think the importance of that connectivity back down to local is really important, because otherwise, if you don't have a sense of stakeholder connection to culture and the creative industries at a real local level, then that disconnect won't ever be solved in terms of how are you going to solve the 750 million deficit in Birmingham. Like the people have to come together around trying to work out the long-term solution to that problem. And therefore we all need to feel connected at different levels. And I think certainly in terms of R&D, the ability to do and allocate money often, I think, needs a scale element to it.
Yeah.
But the decisions on how it gets allocated needs to come from a local level. These are the things that we need. But then it sort of like waterfalls from.
I would, in my experience, and I'm fairly new to the creative sector and WMCA. I would say to you, in the West Midlands Combined Authority, they might not have the experience, but they don't have to listen. They talk to you. I'm connected into it, and that's not unusual. It is unusual actually for what I do. I'm very connected in. I should have been at something this afternoon where they were talking about the next stage, and they are listening. And I think genuinely, I've been around in the sector, around in the education for a long time. Do I think I'm heard when it comes to the Combined Authority? Yes, I do. So I think there is an opportunity to meet with them and kind of. They are connecting. I think there's a way that you can help shape what they do in the future.
I mean, in a sense, what is interesting about this for me is that we almost are learning another new language of finance. And I wanted to sort of talk about financial literacy because, people who get grants and subsidies and then apply for money from philanthropists or businesses, like a sponsorship, that's all a skill that, is like hardwired now into the sort of subsidised sector or the R&D sector, perhaps that's a better way to put it. And then there'll be businesses here who are much more, used to angel investment and raising and so on. And those two things don't meet together at the moment. We don't know how to put those two things together usually. But I think that, we have to learn from places, and this is where the international conversations are so good. Many places don't have a cultural sector funded. Everybody has to have a job, a side hustle, an enterprise. And, when Hector was talking about what was happening in South Africa in, helping young creatives to build their independence financially through how they understand how to get their hands on money, how to grow money, how to get investors. I mean, we're not very good talking about money, at least probably some of you are brilliant, but I think we haven't as a sector been famous for knowing how to argue for and get money and grow our own. And I'm really keen that we have a kind of new amount of financial literacy to us, for us, so that we can understand how we can grow and make money without feeling as if sort of we're always like small fry in relationship to people who really do this stuff. I think it would be very, very
that's really interesting.
transformational.
I was talking to a Vice Chancellor of a kind of art, creative, smaller university recently, who's come in, and her strategy is everybody going through any of those programs should come out at the end of it knowing how to run themselves as a business.
Yeah,
and I thought that was really
it's difficult
striking.
because, quite understandably, students going into arts college are fed up with being told, listen, it's about business, it's about earning money. They think, well, no, let me be expressive. Can I learn my art? And they're right. But at the same time, I don't want us to be financially naive and in jeopardy because the freelancers are distraught, quite rightly, by the complete lack of safety nets for them, which was all completely clear during COVID. So we have to own our relationship with money differently. That's what I'm saying.
And all I was going to add was that when I was working on the startup review for Rachel Reeves, one of the big things I wanted to push was pension reform and pension consolidation, which is part of her Mansion House speech just last week. And part of that was around this sense of like, if you can get pension fund money, which in and of itself is more diverse because it's everybody's, right? So everybody's pension has gone into that money. It also ends up being often quite place-based because it's related to place and space. So off the back of trying to consolidate some of that money and into sort of more equity-based or risk-based and different financial instruments, there's the potential for more of that money to flow through into social innovation and deliver sort of the types of financial instruments that could come into more non-profit based, place-based investing. So that's one of the things I think could end up being an offshoot of
So
that type of money.
both new sources and new models of finance as well. So
blended finance that we haven't really had before.
Correct.
Do you think there's anything that the sector needs to do to respond to this, to change? I know, because one of the other things Andy Burnham said earlier on was, well, we as a sector, we need to create clear pathways into jobs. Does that resonate with?
Absolutely. I think that, interestingly, one of the things that the government don't do is they don't actually count freelancing. So when I kind of students leave my school, I have to class them as in education, employment or training. And if they're not in one of those, they're neat. If they're freelancers, they're neat. Neat are bad. I get slapped on my wrist for that. And it's a strange thing considering that's what the sector creative arts is about. But it does, I think it holds a problem in the fact that there are certain sectors of society who worry about that. They don't want their children to go into a freelancing economy. They want them to have a job. They want them to have a career. They want to have them in a kind of way through. And actually, where you've got pockets of unemployment, and probably that you will a little bit more, and we haven't talked about digital, but as you get more into the digital age of creative industries, particularly around AI, that it's competing with lots of other areas, and the only way you're going to get a pipeline coming through is actually to think about how are you going to perhaps change that freelancing model, because actually there is an element of risk in that, and there are some people who take that risk, but there are a lot of sectors in the society who won't take that risk. And I do think you have to think about how you're going to change that into the way it is. And if you compared to yourself and the industrial strategy back to other places, and Andy and I had a pre-conversation about engineering. Engineering years ago suddenly found themselves in a real problem. They hadn't got engineers, and there's still now, engineering within the creative sector is difficult to find engineers at times. And what did? They responded by putting on huge amounts of apprenticeships all the way through to degree level, and then students could choose how they went into engineering, got into it, and they were really they went into schools. I had some schools that were engineering, recruiting, etc. So they were very clear about what they did, and it was very different. And I think perhaps the creative industries do need to look at their model and about to get that pipeline through. I'm not saying that freelance should disappear. I'm just saying that I think that you need to think about how it is to attract more sectors of society coming into your industry and making it grow as it should.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree with that. So I know that Ashram Ratchia, who has the academy here in Manchester, he talks about that story of when he was at the Hut Group and they wanted to employ 5,000 people, and he was told that those people don't exist in the Manchester area. So they built their own training platform and basically hired 4 attributes, and then off the back of that built the resource and talent pool that they needed, and he's now doing that for other businesses. And I think in terms of that point about creativity and how we teach the future generation, I don't believe my kids will need to code. So I think it's all going to be that.
That's from your background, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's all going to be about the creative thinking about how am I getting the AI agent to do the interesting things.
So we need to be proactive about that, planning for that rather than reacting to it.
I'm going to say something completely different, really, which is about gender, which is that as the creative industries become more and more about portfolio activity, women who still primarily give birth and then are automatically somehow assumed to have the primary responsibility for looking after the children. After all, we do need them. Children, we need them. Women are not being taken into account still in terms of how industries grow. I mean, because in a sense, like, it's still the fastest way to the success. And when you're looking at this current economic sort of freeze, then finding a way through is going to be, just grabbing what you can and putting it together in different ways. It leaves no space, actually, for marginalised situations. And so I'm really concerned that the amount of women who come into the creative industries in the last 30 years, because in a way we've been allowed, because it's been like it's normalised that women can be doing what we do, actually are going to get pushed back out again, because the economic circumstances and the way that the freelance life will work means that if they carry on having the primary responsibilities for children, they just have to keep rethinking their career over and over again. And it's a major problem. So an industrial strategy could actually end up moving us back to quite a narrow demographic if we're not careful. So we have to be really doing a lot of complex thinking. And I don't think you say, what does the sector need to do? The sector needs to think more deeply about what they really mean by intersectionality, which is a phrase that everybody's come to use. But there are massive disadvantages to all the structural biases that exist, and I don't see that they are being driven out by modern technology. They're being hardened in by modern technology, and we have to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's a really important one. Look, I could listen to you three for hours, and I'm sure everybody else could, but we're not allowed to. So what I'm going to do is just a quick fire. This strategy is going to evolve. It's going to be 6 months or so until we actually see the full fruits of it and it rolled out. What's the just one thing that you'd like to see in there? And it could be about our sector, it could be about cities, it could be about something you'd like to see in there that somebody else will fix.
I don't think I can come up with one answer, but I'd like to see connection between the cities to support creativity, certainly from Birmingham, but also I want to see creativity back into all our lives in terms of I want that creativity continue, and that will only happen in Birmingham if we connect with other people.
Yeah.
For me, creative industries are absolutely core strength of the UK, and what I want to see is that come through very strongly and clearly. So from my perspective, it's how do we support our creative industries to export more? They're a key export market. We should and a key soft power for us. How do we think about domestic regulation better so that we're supporting our UK institutions? Because currently I believe that a lot of the other global institutions of the likes of the US and the Chinese are gradually eating our lunch, and we should be doing that better. And then the third piece is how do we basically get the people coming in eating our lunch to contribute more? So Netflix needs to do as much as the BBC in terms of garnering and supporting talent and skills.
I'd like us to think about children's rights completely differently. I know that's a big thing to ask industrial strategy to do, but at the moment we talk about pipelines as if we just got these children to get creative so that they can turn into people who have jobs in our industry. And that's great in a way. I want them to as well. But I also very, very much want them to feel that we are interested in them creatively now. I don't just mean that they have good creative education in schools, but I don't think our sector have ever really cared that much about making children's work. Canada actually does, so I'll make that an exception. But in general, we don't make work very much for children. And yet at the same time, we're hoping that they'll all kind of move up to be very creative. So I think we should rethink our attitude to children.
Okay, fantastic.
So just a few things.
Yeah, just a few tiny things to add in there.
Can I just come back on Jude's point? I think your point is very well made, but I would just say to everybody out there, you don't need the industrial strategy to get involved in that.
Exactly.
Go to your local school and get in contact with them. And if they don't contact you back, contact them again. Because you know what? You've got so much to give to students out there. Please do.
And that's what I meant.
From me.
Don't chase the sausage of the industrial strategy. Let's just keep making our own work be as brave and as bold and as thoughtful as possible, because that's really what will grow the sector.
Fantastic. Inspirational, positive, wide-ranging. Can I have a big hand for Kate, Tom and Jude?